Good morning. Good Wednesday morning, July 12th. The day after the High Holy Day of Lontober, my birthday yesterday. Here's one of the cards. I have to, first of all, before I say anything else, I have to thank all of you, quite a few of you actually, so many that it will be difficult, if not totally impossible, for me to thank each and every one of you directly, even to tokenly respond with a happy face or a heart or something. But I appreciate all of your kind wishes and your messages, and yes, and your presence. Thank you very much. Your presents are not only appreciated; they are put to good use. Okay, so I'm not to be cliche. I am literally as much as pompous, presumptuous narcissist that I am. I'm humbled by all of your kind birthday wishes. So thank you very much. And Constance gave me the most memorable birthday of my life. That's because I've forgotten most of them. Actually, it was absolutely wonderful. And oh, look, there's someone that wishing me happy birthday. Maybe I'll answer it. Join me, if you will. The only calls we ever get on this phone are robocalls. Hello. No, I think you're a crook. I don't think you say who you are. I don't give you permission to record me. What do you think of that? Okay. Why don't you just have a nice day and never call me again? Okay? That's all right. Goodbye. Be careful the rest of the day too, okay? Now, that was nothing. Constance gets so mad at me when I play with the telemarketers, and it's a flaw in my character. I have to admit that because I sold magazine advertising over the telephone, and I know what these poor people go through. And but when I know it is something that is aimed at cheating and literally robbing, especially senior citizens, with Medicare fraud things, and I have no mercy. Okay, and but because you were watching, I was extra polite. But I digress, and I've taken the phone off the hook. On July 12th, 1985, Constance and Jean-Paul and I were at an Angels baseball game. California Angels. Get it? Angels. Our good friend, Karen James, had a wonderful, wonderful kind of prestigious job that gave her sort of a little box. I mean, like a block of 6 seats or more, I forget, but at least there was 3 seats of season tickets to the Angels that her company provided their executives. And she kindly said, "Hey, for your birthday, you kids go to the baseball game." And we love going to the baseball game, and it was sort of our ritual. Baseball's kind of a holy sport that plays on a diamond, and the grass smells so wonderful, and you can astrally project through the foul posts, and we always drive up there and sit in the parking lot. And once we get safely in the parking lot, our ritual was, not for Jean-Paul, but for Constance and me, I would slam back one of those canned martinis, one of those cheap, poisonous canned martinis, and get out of the car, lock up the car, slam back that martini, and then walk as fast as we can to get through the turnstiles and get our seats and everything else, so we could sit down just as the martini was starting to hit. And there would be at the baseball game, with that, enjoying that 3 minutes where the martini puts you in paradise. Then after that, it's downhill from then on. That's how alcohol works. But anyway, it's my habit at a baseball game, when the public address system comes on to like an emergency announcement, and it's mostly doctors who are being paged. It hardly ever happens, but when it does, it's usually a serious thing. Attention please. Would Dr. Seymour Bentley please report to security? Or would Senator Sherilyn, okay. And every time it happens, everybody stops and listens because it's so rare. But when they say, attention please, I, in my canned martini bliss, would always listen to them to finish the thing. Would Dr. Seymour Bentley please report to... And I would, to the person sitting next to me, to the total stranger sitting next to me, I would always go, excuse me, I'm Dr. Seymour Bentley. And I wait till all of the people between me and the aisle get up to let me pass. And then I go, nah, I'm not Seymour Bentley. And it would always embarrass Constance, it embarrass Jean-Paul, but I'd do it. I'd do it every time. So this time, the day after my birthday, in Martini Bliss, attention please, would Lon Milo DuQuette please come to security? Now, in my martini brain, I just heard, attention please. And I was getting ready to inconvenience all the people sitting next to me. And that part that it said Lon Milo DuQuette just sort of went through one ear and out the other. I just knew I had to inconvenience the people sitting next to me. So I said, excuse me, I'm Lon Milo DuQuette. And then I had to stop and think, I am Lon Milo. But anyway, there's a point to this. I go down to security, and I'm really worried because it's kind of a serious thing when this happens, and so I don't know. I'm worried what's going on in my life. Who died? And I go to the phone, and the guy at security sort of looks like this at me. Oh, here you go, Mr. DuQuette. And he hands me the phone. And it's Doug James. Okay. My dearest OTO friend, Doug of Doug and Karen James. They knew we were at the baseball game. And he says, Lon! He says, I told him your father died. And I'm going, why you did? And he said, Grady just died. And he's talking about Grady McMurtry. Grady L. McMurtry. There's a young Grady McMurtry in the 40s. He's a lieutenant there. He retired a lieutenant colonel. Grady was, we called him the Caliph, because in a sense he was, with his letters of authorization from Aleister Crowley, Crowley referred to him as the Caliph, successor to the literally the kingship of the OTO. And when Grady died, at that point in the OTO's history, it was a political ballet of medieval depth that could rarely happen any place in the 20th century at the time. But I'm going to do something just very white bread and pedestrian here. Instead of going through all sorts of personal reminiscences of how much the deceased person loved me, rather than about them, I'm going to read just what white bread Wikipedia has to say about this dear, colorful, and important magical personality. Grady Lewis McMurtry. He was born October 18th, 1918. And he died July 12th, 1985. Grady and my father were both princes of cups, which may be kind of important to me, but perhaps not for you. He was a student of author and occultist Aleister Crowley and an adherent of Thelema. He is best known for reviving the fraternal organization Ordo Templi Orientis, which he headed from 1971 until his death in 1985. Early life, he was born at Big Cabin, Oklahoma, and he died in Martinez, California, just sort of the Bay Area there. His education, the University of California, Berkeley. It says occupation, Caliph, OTO. Early life and career. Here we go. He lived in various parts of Oklahoma, and the Midwest and graduated from high school in Valley Center, Kansas in 1937. He then moved to Southern California to study engineering at Pasadena Junior College, where he made friends with some students at the nearby California Institute of Technology. Among them was Jack Parsons, who shared his enthusiasm for science fiction and who introduced him to Thelema. In 1941, Grady McMurtry was initiated into the Minerval and the first degree of Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, a secret society headed at the time by Aleister Crowley. In February 1942, 2 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, McMurtry's entire reserve officers training class was called to active duty, and he served as an officer in ordnance. He took care of bombs, big bombs. He took part in the invasion of Normandy, the liberation of France and Belgium, and the occupation of Germany. He was recalled to active duty to serve in the Korean War, eventually reaching the rank of major. He was recalled again for another tour of duty in Korea in the early 1960s. 6 months prior to completing 30 years of reserve service, he was mustered out as a lieutenant colonel. During an RIF, or a reduction in force, and lost what would have been an earned pension. He continued his academic studies as a civilian between tours of duty at the University of California, Berkeley, where he completed an AB in political science in 1948, the year I was born, and a master's and an MA in that discipline in 1955. His thesis for the latter degree examined the parallels between magic and Marxism. In a 1970 conversation with Jacques Vallée, who was flummoxed by McMurtry's lengthy military career, McMurtry identified as a political liberal. He noted his opposition to Richard Nixon's Middle East policies and characterized himself as a, quote, poet who happened to fight in 2 wars. During World War II, especially, he was stationed in England in 1943 and the first half of 1944. McMurtry was able to meet with and become a personal student of Aleister Crowley, who elevated him to 9th degree of OTO and giving him the name Hymenaeus Alpha, which enumerates to 777. He gave him that name in 1943. Now, McMurtry was a lieutenant and had access not only to a jeep, but access to petrol. And so he, at every opportunity where he was off duty, he had at his disposal the luxury, the wartime luxury of having at his disposal a jeep, and he could travel out to the country to, not out of the country, but out in the countryside, to meet regularly with Aleister Crowley. It was the only American to do so during the war years, I might add. Okay. In September and November of 1944, and once again in June 47, he received letters from Crowley referring to him as Crowley's, quote, caliph. Caliph is an Islamic title, successor, the one that follows the prophet. When McMurtry returned to California after the war, he was appointed Crowley's OTO representative in the United States. That was in April 1946. Subject only to the authority of Crowley's viceroy and heir apparent, Karl Germer. Crowley died in 1947, and Germer was recognized as the head of the OTO. At the time, the only functioning thelemic OTO body in the world was Agape Lodge in Southern California, which was headed for a time by McMurtry's friend, Jack Parsons. McMurtry planned to start a lodge in Northern California, but his deteriorating relationship with Karl Germer, and that was because Karl refused to initiate new members, put an end to his plans. He tried to organize other OTO members in California to lobby Germer to change his policy, but the situation came to a head in a meeting in 1959 in Lakewood, California. That's where I was, okay. In which Dr. Gabriel Montenegro, Germer's representative, ordered McMurtry to cease his efforts. The order was reiterated in writing in November of 1960, and McMurtry unwillingly complied with the order. And he was disillusioned enough by this turn of events that he ended his direct involvement with OTO. And there really wasn't an OTO to be involved in anyway, because of this situation. In 1961, he moved to Washington, D.C., where he soon became completely out of touch with other OTO members. It must have been very, very discouraging. Reestablishing OTO. On October 25, 1962, Germer died from prostate cancer at the age of 77, without naming a successor as the head of OTO. His widow, who was not a member of the OTO, retained material possession of OTO's extensive archives. Though individual members carried on with their spiritual activities, the central organization, for all intent and purposes, ceased to function. There were a few individuals, noticeably Kenneth Grant of Britain, Hermann Metzger of Switzerland, and later Marcelo Ramos Mota in Brazil, who claimed succession to Germer. McMurtry was unaware of any of these developments, including the fact that Karl died. That's how out of touch he was. You know, in that scene of The Godfather, how Michael says how he tries and tries to get out, but they just keep pulling me in. Well, that's probably about how Grady was feeling at this time. Grady was unaware of any of these developments until 1968, where he received a letter from Phyllis Seckler, a fellow Agape Lodge initiate. Seckler's letter was to inform McMurtry that the archives in Germer's widow's care, including Aleister Crowley's library, had been burglarized the previous year by persons unknown. When he became aware of the situation, he decided to take charge of what remained of the OTO. In 1969, he left his job at the United States Department of Labor and returned to California to investigate the burglary. Though the crime was never officially solved, McMurtry felt that it had probably been carried out by a group falsely claiming affiliation with OTO that called itself the Solar Lodge. McMurtry had moved into Seckler's home in Dublin, California, and soon they were married. And that home in Dublin is where Phyllis and Grady initiated me. But that comes a little later here. At this time, McMurtry decided to restore the order by invoking his emergency authorities from Crowley, which gave him authority, subject to Carl Germer's approval, to take, quote, to take charge of the whole work of the order in California and to reform the organization, unquote. And he assumed the title Caliph of OTO as specified in Crowley's letters to McMurtry from the 40s. His witnesses were Dr. Israel Regardie, 1907 to 1985. He died in 85 also. The witnesses were Dr. Israel Regardie and Gerald York, who both offered their support. Grady called them the Eyes of Horus. I threw that in. Along with Seckler and two surviving members, Mildred Burlingame and Helen Parsons Smith, he slowly began performing OTO initiations again. They also eventually succeeded in their efforts to find a publisher for the Thoth Tarot deck. Designed by Aleister Crowley, OTO was registered with the state of California on December 28, 1971, as a legal organization. In 1974, McMurtry and Seckler separated, and he moved to Berkeley, California. Germer's widow died in 1975, and in 1976, the surviving members of the OTO were enabled by court order to claim the still considerable archives. In October 1977, this is 2 years after I was initiated, McMurtry founded Thelema Lodge in Berkeley to serve as the headquarters of his resurrected OTO. So that was October 1977. Grand Lodge was established, Thelema Grand Lodge, and let's see, what October, November, December, January. Then 90 days later, Grady chartered Haru Rahal Lodge, OTO, chartered me. And it was the first local lodge chartered under a Grand Lodge auspices, certainly in the United States. Yeah, in history. Okay. Let's see. Many initiations were performed, and a weekly celebration of the Gnostic Mass was soon established in the San Francisco Bay Area. McMurtry and other initiators chartered by him, me included, establish OTO groups in many other areas in the United States and internationally. By 1985, OTO, by its own report, had more than 700 members in several different countries. I think we're up to over 3,000 now. In that year, McMurtry, in failing health, successfully sued Moda in the United States District Court over possession of OTO trademarks and copyrights. Grady died in Martinez, California, convalescent hospital, on the day the U.S. court clerk released the text of the decision that set the seal on McMurtry's efforts to reestablish OTO. Since then, the OTO had, by its own report, grown to over 3,000 members in more than 40 countries. Although numbers have been declined significantly over the last decade in active membership. Active activities took a big hit, of course, during the pandemic. Anyway, that is a brief, just normal white bread, not very esoteric, little biography of a great person. Like all of us, Grady had his shortcomings, and but he and Phyllis did a marvelous thing. Like I say, they both initiated me, and they were in the process of splitting up. It's just like as soon as you're born, your parents divorce, and in my mind, the OTO leadership and the organizational spiritual leadership was unquestionably Grady, but my personal magical AA relationship I formed with Phyllis, and that always, especially in the early years when there was still marital hard feelings and things like that, but I walked that tightrope. I joyously walked that tightrope, because this is part of my story too. Anyway, that's it for the day after Lon's birthday. At my Minerval initiation on November 15th, 1975, in Dublin, California, right down the road here a piece. I naively, obviously I was naive, asked Grady if he had any advice to give to a young magician. I was 28, yeah. Young magician just starting out in his magical career. Give me some advice to take home. Give me an oracle, Well, he did give me an oracle. He gave me Crowley's I Ching sticks, and and Crowley's I Ching text book, which was an old leg version that Crowley used preparing his translation. But I digress. And he said, well, I asked the old man that myself back in England. You got to remember, Grady was a soldier visiting Crowley. Grady had only taken the OTO Minerval and first degree. I'm not sure he even was a second degree at the time. But the ninth degree is you can get it at any time. But anyway, so Grady was, wow, I've got all of this stuff, and you got any advice for me? And so when I asked Grady that same advice, he said, well, the old man, I asked the old man the same thing. And he looked at me and he puffed his pipe and he said, and then Grady puffed his pipe. He says, try to visit the water closet whenever you get the opportunity, because you never know when you're going to get the opportunity. And then he puffed his pipe. Okay. I know that was kind of a funny thing. Actually, I asked Grady this question after my second degree initiation. And for those of you who have experienced that, Grady's answer actually makes sense about visiting the water closet. So I wrote a poem right after my second degree. The Water Closet, Caleb's Advice, by Lon Milo DuQuette, written immediately following his second-degree OTO initiation, 1976. Okay. Adepts and Mahatmas can dance widdershins while they devil and beast and oz it. An aspirant's day mysteriously begins with a visit to the water closet. Forefinger on left nostril, thumb on its mate. He blows out his air and he draws it. With postnasal drip, pranayama is great while sitting in the water closet. In Mass 44, okay, that's the Mass of the Phoenix where you cut your chest open. In Mass 44, inflamed he prays, so deep that he has to gauze it. A comfort to know repairs can be made by a visit to the water closet. Hanged man, water. Noah's Ark, Osiris and Seth, effect and all things that cause it. How much like birth, how very much like death is a visit to the water closet. Until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself, be good to each other. Enjoy the afterglow of Lon's birthday. Do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Remembering you today, Grady.